Okay, so I recently finished playing Spider-Man 2, and I also just went and saw Venom: The Last Dance, and it has me thinking after playing the Venom sequence in Spider-Man 2, what does the upcoming Venom game need to be a great game? There are so many things that this Venom game can do well, but also a lot of things it can do poorly. So let's dive into a few things Insomniac's Venom game needs to be successful, and just a few things that I'm hoping for. The first thing that I would love to see in Insomniac's Venom game is the introduction of Eddy Brock as our main character. No, not that one, he sucked, but maybe something more like this one, Tom Hardy's version of Eddy Brock. After the events of Spider-Man 2, Harry is in a clearly weakened state, and without the symbiote, he isn't getting any better at this stage. I feel as though this is the perfect time to bring in Eddy and have the symbiote somehow survive and find its way to Eddy Brock. The rumored name for the Venom game is Venom Lethal Protector, which tells me that we aren't likely to be playing as the villain version of Venom that we saw with Harry in Spider-Man 2. I really like this and feel as though it is another opportunity to change the host of Venom. Now, not only does this introduce Eddy Brock, but it also frees up Harry from the story's main Venom character, and I know this could be a stretch, but that would also leave room for either Harry to pass away and his father Norman filled with rage, blaming Spider-Man and assuming the role of now Green Goblin in Spider-Man 3 game. Either this or Harry somehow survives his sickness, blames Peter for taking away the symbiote in the second game, and becomes Green Goblin himself in the third game. At this stage, we're yet to have any hint, mention, or sighting of Green Goblin in the Spider-Man story, but there definitely is gaps where it could line up, and it's just something that I'm kind of hoping for, and I know there's a lot of people out there that would probably think the same because, in my opinion, Spider-Man's main villain is Green Goblin. So the fact that we haven't seen him at all throughout these games yet definitely leaves an opportunity open for him to come through in Spider-Man 3. And the characters are there, the stage is set, and like I just pointed out, it's a very realistic chance that either Norman or Harry, with the rage that they're filled with at this point, could turn into Green Goblin. So we're gonna have to wait and see, but again, that's one thing that I'm hoping for. My next main point for things that I need to do well is the open world. Now, Insomniac has done a pretty decent job in the last 3 games, showing us New York City and its surrounding boroughs in Spider-Man 2. But after 3 games, the traversal and location is starting to feel a little bit stale. I would love to see the introduction of somewhere new like San Francisco, and that Eddy Brock on a trip to New York was infected by the symbiote without knowing. This gives a new location for us to play in. It gives us an example of why he wasn't there previously because he was already living in San Francisco, and he's just come to visit New York for the weekend, as we know he did work for the Daily Bugle. Now, this could also help separate Venom from Pete and Miles, and leaving Eddy to figure things out on his own. After his trip to New York, he returns to San Francisco with the symbiote unknowingly, and then has to figure everything out by himself, what's going on, similar to the way they did in the movies. This starts a fresh Venom story. You get away from Spider-Man and Miles Morales. You obviously have so many things that you can do here creative-wise with the story, and Tom Hardy's version of Venom was a really enjoyable story, especially in the first movie. That's probably my favorite out of the 3, I would say. It's probably a mixed opinion from everybody, but I really liked the first movie. So having that sort of storyline, but being able to put Insomniac's twist on it, they do a really good job of creating their own story from the characters we have. So I think that would be something that they could play with and make really interesting. Now, my ideas for when the game starts, it could be that Eddy has become infected and he has to learn how to control Venom and what's needed to survive. They could add the element of survival, as we know the hungrier Venom gets, the more it starts to affect Eddy as well. And if the game, and I'm not saying that it will, potentially had an R rating, finding ways to incorporate something like, the way that he feeds on bad guys, as he refers to them in the movies. He could go out and have a feeding frenzy, or obviously taking out crimes throughout the city. That would be a way to refuel his hunger. Now, if we're not going for an R rating in this game, you could always find a way to incorporate chocolate, which is of course Venom's favorite snack, and finding ways for him to keep it from losing it, because we know what effects it has to Eddy when he doesn't get fed. So this could be another interesting survival kind of element to the game that I was thinking of, but nonetheless, I'm sure there's a way to do it. There's probably much better ways than my ideas. So if you guys can think of another way to incorporate this sort of survival system, then definitely let me know in the comments. Another gameplay aspect that would be really cool to see is obviously free roam, but more specifically switching between Venom and Eddy in the open world. Eddy is of course a journalist, so being able to stay in his human form to research facilities like the Life Foundation from the first movie, it gives Insomniac an opportunity for their own spin on the Venom story and taking parts from the movies but then creating their own story with it. Now, there definitely could be side missions and research and all these different things that you can do as Eddie himself without having Venom take over. And I feel like there could be side missions or different things that you can do with just Eddie and not so much Venom. So that would be a really interesting aspect as well. As far as the villains go, the obvious answer is Carnage after the events of Spider-Man 2. However, like I just mentioned, the game has the opportunity to bring in the Life Foundation with Dr. Carlton Drake, who ends up with the Riot symbiote in the first Tom Hardy film. Now, I know I'm referring back to this a lot, but it's kind of the best example we've got of Venom without diving deep into the comics. This would allow for a longer story introducing a second villain to the game as well, because we're pretty much almost guaranteed to have Carnage as a villain too, but having Riot in there as like an early game boss and then getting Carnage later down the line, I think would just extend the game out that little bit further so it didn't feel as short as Miles Morales. Now, you can always just stick to the events of Spider-Man 2 with the only villain being Carnage after you see what happened in the Flame side missions, but, you know, like I said, it feels like it would just be a shortened version of the game and a missed opportunity. Now, as far as the size of the game, it needs to be at least longer than what the Miles Morales game was. When I played through Miles Morales, I felt like I blinked and it was over, and that's with completing the Platinum Trophy for it as well, where I had to do a full rerun through on New Game Plus. Now, the New Game Plus was torture because getting through Miles Morales was, you know, alright, and by the time I got to the end of it, I was like, okay, that's fine, that was pretty quick, but then having to do a full New Game Plus run just made the Platinum Trophy feel like it drags. But I digress, that's a different topic altogether. We're talking about Venom here. So with Miles Morales taking about 10 to 12 hours to complete, and for someone who has a decent amount of free time, it won't be long before they finish a game that size. Venom already has a ton of assets to pull from, and from what we saw in Spider-Man 2, a decent amount of combat already fleshed out. It would be awesome to see something like 15 hours plus from the Venom game, as there's almost no chance it is going to be the same scale as the main Spider-Man games, but one can hope, because if we were to get a 20-hour plus Venom game, I think a lot of people would be really happy, and a lot of people would go out for that purchase. Another interesting feature before I wrap up is something that I thought of could be the karma system. There are some games that have done this in the past, and it allows you to make choices either good or bad throughout the story, giving you alternate endings to play through. However, I do feel as though this is much less likely with the way that Marvel likes to tie their stories together. Giving two endings would kind of make it a little bit harder to introduce Spider-Man into the game if they were planning some sort of future team up between the two, which they've done in the comics before. So again, this one's a bit of a stretch. Giving you alternate endings in a Marvel story doesn't really sound like something they would do. But again, it would give that gameplay aspect where if you were to replay it and you have different options throughout the game, it just adds to the replayability. Now, there are so many possibilities for this Venom game, and I'm curious to know what you all thought of these ideas. Also, what are you guys hoping for in the new Venom game as well? Make sure you let me know down in the comments, as I do check them pretty regularly. And if you enjoy this content, be sure to stick around because there is more coming in the future. We're very close to the release of Marvel Rivals as well, so if you guys want me to cover that, I'm happy to do so, and I will see you guys very, very soon.